On to round one. Our motion is the U.S. has no dog in the fight in Syria. And here to speak first for the motion from the lectern, Graham Allison. He is director of the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, professor of government at the Harvard Kennedy School, and former assistant secretary of defense. Ladies and gentlemen, Graham Allison.
So thank you very much, John, and it's an honor for Rich and I to appear even in a debate with two such distinguished colleagues. But I want to warn you at the outset that this is a bit of a mismatch. Rich and I are academics and think tank types. Nick and Nigel are two of the most effective public advocates we've seen in recent times. Nick is one of my colleagues and friends at Harvard, because our office is about 20 feet apart. I introduce him as often as I can to Harvard audiences because I would prefer him to speak than me. And always I say, which is what I truly believe, that the U.S. has had no more effective public spokesman in modern times than Nick Burns when he was Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs. Nigel is a legendary... Nigel is a legend in Washington as the British ambassador to the U.S., who is an extremely, again, effective public spokesman. So as you listen to the discussion tonight, I hope you'll think about the evidence and the analysis presented and not the eloquence, because if that was the case, you can vote now and be done. Okay? So, the motion is about a dog in the fight. Let me just ask, how many people here have a dog? Okay, so I just want to see if it's a dog-friendly audience. I think Aspen is usually fairly dog-friendly. So as you think about the argument tonight, consider this. You go around a corner, you confront dogs in a fight, and you will think what to do. And compare that with a second case in which you're confronting a dog fight in which one dog has its mouth around the other's throat, and you discover that it's your dog. So the question is this America's dog in this fight? So as the moderator reminded us, this assignment tonight is not whether the U.S. should care about the dogs that are tearing each other apart in Syria tonight. It's tragic, and anybody that looks at it without having their heart torn ought to have an MRI to see if their heart's turned to stone. The question is, how much should we care, and what should we do about it? So, in the language of national security, the question is, does what's happening in Syria so impact American vital national interests that we're compelled to do everything we can, including military actions, to secure our interest? That's what it is to have a vital national interest. And secondly, if the answer to that is yes, or even if you're a little shaky on that one, has anybody been able to identify a feasible American military intervention that would likely make the situation better over the long run than after we had acted, than in the case we did not act? So, if you think about this, be clear, and let me be as unambiguous as we can. Our answer to these questions, these two questions, are no and no. No, the U.S. does not have a vital national interest in what's happening in Syria. And no one is, at least to my satisfaction, or Rich's, or indeed to Chairman Dempsey, the chairman of the JCS, identified a feasible American military intervention, which, after the fact, would likely make the situation over time better than the alternative. So, it's to our opponents, I think, to explain how and why they disagree with these judgments, and to suggest to us what evidence leads them to that conclusion. In this opening comments, I'm going to just make some general comments that bear, general big points, big picture, that bear on the question you have in front of you. And then my colleague Rich is going to drill down in more detail. 4 quick points. First, Sam Nunn, who's a member of the Aspen Strategy Group, which we're all here as part of, likes that, insists that we draw the distinction between vivid and vital. Because he says, whenever something is vivid, especially if it appears on TV over and over and people are being killed, Americans, or many Americans, imagine, well, we must have a vital interest there because it's impacting our interests. And since we're the world's greatest military superpower, maybe there's a military intervention we could undertake to make things better. In our view, that's not the case here. This is a vivid, painful, but not vital. Vital in the dictionary, read it, says essential for survival and well-being. In the mantra of national security, it says essential for the preservation of the U.S. as a free society with our fundamental institutions and values intact. Syria does not meet that test. Now, some of you will say, well, maybe that's too high a test. I mean, could anything threaten our vital interest? And I would say in 1990, when Saddam tried to annex Kuwait and threatened the whole possibility of the flow of oil from the Persian Gulf, President Bush, the father, chose military action, and that was the right choice.
Graham Allison, I'm sorry, your introductory remark time is up and concluded. Thank you very much, Graham Allison. I want to point out our introductory remarks last 6 minutes each. I gave Graham 7 because he spent the first time saying such nice things about the other side. Although it might have been a sneak attack, I'm not sure. Also, your timers will say 6 minutes from this point forward. Our motion is the U.S. has no dog in the fight in Syria, and here to speak against the motion is our next debater, Nick Burns. He is professor at the Harvard Kennedy School, director of the Aspen Strategy Group, and former Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, Nicholas Burns.
John, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure for Nigel and I to be with Richard and Graham. They're both good friends. I won't try to butter them up anymore. I need my time. But I will say this. We've been asked to address one question. Does the United States of America have a dog in the fight in Syria? The question wasn't whether it's vital. The question wasn't whether it's feasible. Do we have an interest in who wins in this fight in Syria? And the answer is unequivocally, of course, yes, without any question. Because Americans should be supporting the Syrian people who've been brutalized by the Syrian dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad, and we should oppose the Assad regime because it's being supported by Iran and Hezbollah and Russia. So that's the dog in the fight for the United States. And what happens in Syria really matters to our country, for our national security. I would say it matters to every American. Let me give you 3 reasons why. First, there's a humanitarian imperative. I think everybody knows what's been happening. There's a catastrophic humanitarian situation in Syria. More than 100,000 Syrians have been killed in the last 2.5 years, all civilians. 1.8 million Syrian refugees outside the country, in Iraq and Turkey and in Jordan, in refugee camps. 6.8 million people in need of humanitarian support, and of those people, 4.5 million have lost their homes in Syria. They're on the roads. They're trying to find a place to live. They've lost their jobs. Former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright is here, and she and I were in Morocco a couple of months ago. We met with the UN envoy for Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi. He told us something that I won't forget. It was very arresting. He said, Syria is melting away because of this humanitarian crisis. So do we have a dog in the fight? We want to help the Syrian people who've been brutalized by their own regime. That's the first reason. The second reason is geography. Look at the map. Syria is a neighbor to very important friends and allies of the United States. It's a neighbor to Israel. It's a neighbor to Turkey, to Iraq, to Jordan, and to Lebanon. So its central strategic position in the Levant, in the heart of the Middle East, in the heart of the Arab world, it means that what happens there really matters to the United States and especially to our ally Israel. And third, Syria matters to the United States because who is arming and aiding and financing this regime? It's our enemy, Iran, and its partner, Hezbollah, and it's our adversary, Russia. So if Assad wins, Iran and Hezbollah become infinitely stronger, and that puts Israel, the United States, and all of our moderate Arab friends at a distinct strategic disadvantage. Do we have a dog in this fight? You better believe we have a dog in this fight. Nigel and I support what President Obama has been trying to do, what the United Kingdom government has been trying to do. There's a coalition of countries, the United States, the European countries, Turkey, nearly all the Arab countries, supported by Israel, who all want to see the following happen. No one wants to put American troops on the ground. In Syria, President Obama has said resolutely he won't do that. But this coalition is trying to do the following. They're trying to launch an intensified international effort. It's been 2 weeks so far. It needs to be strengthened to support the moderate rebels and the majority of the Syrian population who support the rebel movement. They're trying to organize more effective humanitarian aid. We, the Americans, have given a lot. Others need to do more, but it needs to get to the refugees. This group is trying to illuminate, for international judgment and inspection, Assad's war crimes, his brutalization of his own people, and his use of chemical weapons. And this coalition as well is seeking now to build a transitional government formed by the rebel movement that would be a government that can compete with the Assad regime for political support, through which we can give humanitarian aid. And President Obama's former Syria coordinator, Fred Hoff, testified before Congress on July 17th that that should be now the central objective of this coalition. They want to support a political process that eventually, over time, and it's going to take a long time, to make sure that Assad can leave, that a new and more stable transitional government can take his place. It won't be perfect. They'll go through all sorts of ups and downs and frustrations. But at the end of the day, and maybe it's a year or 2 or 3 from now, there's a better, more humane government in power in Damascus. What are the advantages to what President Obama is trying to do? It helps the refugees. It supports the great majority of the population in Syria who are opposed to Assad. It has wide international support. It opposes Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia. It has America leading, but politically, keeping our troops out of harm's way. This is going to be difficult. It's going to be enormously complex. I think we'll see a lot of setbacks. It is not, and I'm sure Graham and Richard will point this out, without its risks, but there is a greater risk of inaction.
Thank you, Nick Burns.
The status quo is unacceptable. I've got 30 seconds.
No.
The status quo is...
You do. I apologize.
Thank you.
You know what?
Thank you, John.
Now you got 45 seconds.
You can cede back the 8 seconds of the status quo here that I've just described is unacceptable for Americans. We cannot stand by and let this happen. No American troops in the ground, but yes to America having a dog in this fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick Burns.